I will open this hearing.
Good.
My name is Marilyn Petito Devaney, and I will be presiding. And first of all, before I start, if there's anyone who wishes to speak, would you please stand for the pledge? Please stand. If you're going to speak today, thank you. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
I do.
Thank you. The other thing is I ask, and no one pays attention, please put your cell phones away in respect to the nominee. It's an important day, and it's really disrespectful. So having said that now, that out of the way, I'm going to start. Welcome.
Thank you,
I
Council.
want to welcome you, and why don't you introduce the people who have come here for you today?
Well, thank you, Counselor. I'll start here with my father, excuse me, Haki Zaganuri,
Welcome.
my uncle, Shemzi Zaganuri, my aunt, Janice Zaganuri, my mother, Farida Zaganuri, my friend and former colleague, Ryan Sullivan. In the back, my wife, Kim Zaganuri, my good friend since middle school, James Fagan. Next to him is my brother, Beck Zaganuri, Alyssa Tochka, my friend and colleague at the Albanian American Bar Association. Next to her is Judge Robert Tochka and Judge David Frank.
I just said to Judge Frank, I had the honor of presiding over his hearing, and I thought I sent him to Concord. I don't think he's ever been.
Yeah.
That's the circuit court, I guess, So first of all, I'm going to call on your witnesses in the order that you have given me. And the first one, and so honored to have you, Judge Pasco, would you sit over there beside the nominee?
Weren't you just here?
I was just here, and I appreciate how you remember that. So
I
thank
was
you
paying
for-
attention.
It seems like I was
you
just
were-
here last week, and I was, you're right. So I want to thank you for the
How
opportunity.
many years has it been now?
18, 12 in district court.
Here in this chamber to be honored that I voted for you, one of my best.
And thank you
friends.
once again.
And I got to tell you, Attorney, I am so glad that you brought two judges that I voted for, that I'm so proud of.
Thank you.
All right, so again, I'm very honored here to speak on behalf of Sammy. And I think the governor and lieutenant governor have made an excellent selection, and I hope that you will see that as well. I've known Sammy for several years, but I've watched his career grow over these years, and I've watched him as he's worked alongside Jay Carney and Hank Brennan, two excellent attorneys in the Commonwealth, two of the best attorneys that I know of. I've watched him grow as he's worked in his own practice, and I've watched him grow as he went back to the DA's office and supervising the DAs in the various district courts. And so you all have that, and you all have his qualifications, and there's no doubt that he is extremely qualified to be a judge. But I'm here to talk more about his temperament, about his personal background. So Sammy and I share a common heritage. His father's from Albania. I was born in Albania. My father was born in Albania as well. And we're both very proud to have parents who supported us all these years and who loved us and who instilled upon us how great it is to be in this country and how proud we should be and honored to be in this country and how we have an obligation to give back. So many years ago, a group of us, because Albania had been closed for approximately 50 years, it didn't open up until the 1990s. And a lot of parents came with their children looking for a better life. And those children went on to college and they went on to professional schools. And so approximately 10 or 12 years now, a group of us got together and said we wanted to help the Albanians who were coming to this country, who didn't have a step up, who didn't have someone to mentor them, to guide them through the system and the like, in terms of who were interested in law school. And Sammy was one of the individuals who stepped up in the Albanian American Bar Association. And I'm proud to say it's the first Albanian American Bar Association in the country to help out the new arrivals who came here. And Sammy has mentored a number of the individuals, a number of the Albanian Americans who are in law school, continue to mentor them when they were lawyers, helping them in terms of job searches and the like. And we're very proud of that. Another thing I'm proud of, and that shows his empathy. And that's important as a judge, that you care for other people. And that shows how much that he cares. We're also very proud of the fact that, as I said, we're all proud to be Americans. And we have in the Albanian American Bar Association contributed to, in terms of various organizations assisting individuals in the Boston area. But we also wanted to do something for individuals in Albania. And so the idea came in terms of raising money to support various worthy cause. And someone came up, and I'm not sure who, and it could have been Sammy, but honestly, I don't remember who, to raise money for an orphanage. But I do know it was Sammy who came up with the idea to raise the money for an orphanage in northern Albania, which is a pretty mountainous area, for an orphanage near his father's home village. And it's not as if there's an Amazon that can go to northern Albania and deliver these items. So Sammy was involved in helping us raise the money. Sammy was involved in making sure that the proper things were purchased in consultation with the orphanage. And Sammy and his father, and particularly his father at this time, went to Albania and made sure that these items got to the orphanage. And we've done that for a number of years. I'm very proud that Sammy did this, and it showed the dedication he had, not only to his father's home country, not only to how much honored he was to do something in his father's home village, near his home village, how much respect he had for his father, but it also shows how caring he was, wanted to help some individuals who were disadvantaged. And he's the type of person, Sammy, when he's mentored individuals, he's done the work for the orphanage. He's a humble person. He's not the person who raises his hand and says, look at what I've done, look at me. He does it because he cares. And I think that is extremely important as a judge, someone who cares as much as he does. And we're very proud of him for that. The last thing I want to talk about is Sammy's involvement in the Peter Muse Paul McLaughlin trial advocacy competition. So many people in this room knew Peter Muse, knew Paul McLaughlin. They were both fantastic attorneys, and they died way too early. And so approximately 10 years or so ago, again, a group of us got together and wanted to help out young DAs and young defense attorneys to learn trial skills. And they would be mentored by district court judges. And so we started a competition, and the winner of the competition for the prosecution gets the Paul McLaughlin Award, and for the defense gets the Peter Muse Award. And in that competition, the witnesses are all area high school kids, Boston high school kids are act as witnesses. And the final trial is held in Boston. And we're very honored that there's a 3-judge panel, one judge from the SJC, one judge, Judge Locke, who was good friends with Paul McLaughlin, and Chris Muse, Peter Muse's brother, is the 3rd judge, who was the coaches and the like judging the competition. And so I had a conversation one time with Sammy about Middlesex. Middlesex, we had gotten approximately 6 counties involved in this competition. And there's a lot of organization that goes on into that. And Sammy asked, what about Middlesex? And I said, well, they're not involved yet. And without skipping a beat, he said, I'd like to get Middlesex involved. And he got Judge Hogan involved. He got the defense bar involved. He got the DA's office involved. And this was in 2019. And that's the type of person he is, that he volunteers, he's humble, he wants to participate, and he cares. And it just reminded me when I was thinking of what I was going to say to you about the caring aspect of it, because that's very important to me. So there's a program called the Choice Program in Roxbury, and it's run by probation and a judge. And the program is to help out young men and women on probation in Roxbury, to help them look for jobs and help them with education. And I sat on that program for many years. And we would, in that program, the individuals, I would meet them on a regular basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, and I'd invite their parents, their family members and the like, and I'd get to meet their family friends and their mothers, their sisters, their uncles and the like. And at the end of the person's probation, I asked them, I'd give them a sheet of paper. I said, look, you're off probation. I'd like you to write 3 things for me: what you liked about the probation, what you did not like, and what you would do to change and what you do to change it. And a lot of them came up with very good ideas, and we adopted them. But a number of the people on probation, a number of the probationers said, thank you, Judge. Thank you to Edie Alexander, the probation officer. I didn't think anybody cared about me in this courthouse. And Sammy is the type of person who does care, and they will know that he cares. And to me, that's the most important thing, because when people come into the courthouse, they have to know that the judge in that courthouse will be fair, but he cares about you as a person and wants to help you, particularly people who are on probation, to succeed. So I think Sammy is the most humble person I know, the most caring person, and the most committed to making in the end that for you to say how proud you are that you nominated, that you voted for him. So I hope that you will vote for him. Thank you.
Thank you. Any councilors have any questions? Before you ask questions, I forgot to introduce colleagues. Councilor Paul DiPaolo, Councilor Terry Kennedy, Councilor Eileen Duff. Now, does anyone have any questions?
Councilor Farrell.
Oh, and we have we have Councilor Hurley, who's on, what do we call it, Zoom? Okay.
WebEx, but
Okay.
same thing.
So I will start with Councilor DiPaolo. Did you raise your hand? Anyone have any questions? I'm sorry. I guess
You
not.
coming back next week, Judge? Huh?
I don't know.
We don't have a hearing, but you're welcome to come back.
I'll be here.
I would just like to ask, are you first generation or are you?
So my father was born in Albania. My mother's Albanian. Her brother was born there, and then a year later she was born here.
I'm first generation American. Yeah. No, I know that they've gone through a lot in Albania,
Right.
and it's wonderful that you have been a mentor. And I want to thank you for starting that program for probation. That's something that's been a big concern of mine. And when I look back, I think of when the parole board had, he was a 3-time lifer, 15 years, and 15 years, I didn't even know that was life, 15 years, 3 life sentences, and he killed the police officer. You knew that. I went to that funeral. The police funerals are heartbreaking. But anyway, I called to find out what they had done, the chair of the probation, Conrad. I wanted to know what he did. And he told me all these things. None of them were true. He told me that they had sent him a plumbing, to learn how to be a plumber, and that he was to report to his probation officer every week, and that he was living with his uncle and paying rent. None of the above. And so that's how I learned to find out, what are they doing? These people, that we count on, these agencies, what are they doing? And so to hear that you did that as an initiative, that's wonderful, because there's so many of them. And the hardest thing for them is housing. You know that. So I thank you for that. So how long has that been in effect, that program?
That's, I'd say probably 12 years now.
Wow, that's great. And so the nominee has followed up on that? Is that what it happened with that?
So he'll have the opportunity, should you nominate him, to participate in that in Roxbury, sure,
Oh,
Roxbury
okay.
Court.
And so, it's such a privilege to see you. Now, have you come before? I don't remember you coming back to speak.
Quite a while ago.
Well,
I'm sure you've seen plenty of
okay.
people in that.
Okay, so we'll hope we'll see you. So this is the first time I've seen Judge. I can't believe it. It's all these years. I keep asking how he is, and is he in Concord? No.
And he stays
So
the same. He never changes. He was the same as he did.
So, so thank you very much. I appreciate that. Our next witness is Judge David Frank. And I believe this is your first time back. I don't remember you speaking for anyone. Yeah.
Not often. I think I spoke for Judge Maida a few years ago.
Yeah, that's
But
right. Well, welcome back.
This is my second time. It's great to see you now.
Well,
as
it's my
always.
pleasure to preside over your hearing. Okay.
So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, an absolute pleasure to be asked to speak in support of the nominee. I think very highly of Mr. Zaganori. He is a fantastic nomination. If he was fortunate enough to be confirmed by this council, I have no doubt he will do an amazing job. Sam is somebody who's appeared before me regularly, first as a defense attorney, and then these last couple of years as a prosecutor in Middlesex County. And like I say, a great nomination, a home run. Sam is smart. He is respectful, thoughtful, all of the attributes that Judge Tosca just mentioned. I agree with completely. It's actually interesting to hear Judge Tosca's observations in a different capacity in terms of knowing Sam, but all of the attributes that Judge Tosca just made reference to, I see it in the courthouse, and I've seen it in the courthouse these last several years when Sam has been in front of me. He has a great reputation. You know, the legal world is a small world, and people talk, and I have never heard anybody say anything other than great things about this nominee. And it's like not just good things. People sort of go out of their way to tell me how great they think he is. I mentioned I was coming down here today, and I had to like tell people, could you stop? I get it. You think he's great. I got to get down to the hearing so I can testify in time. They just think really highly of him, and I do too. As a bar advocate, as a criminal defense attorney, I would see him in court incredibly well prepared, significant caseloads, and Sam was ready to go on all of them. He had done his homework. It was obvious he had conferred with opposing counsel. He had sort of mapped out a plan for how a particular case, from his perspective, ought to go. And it was always clear to me on the bench, sort of observing him in that capacity, that he had prepared and he was ready to sort of take advantage of whatever the court event was. And I would always be really impressed with the level, of advocacy that he showed. And then he was great in his feet. If he was arguing a bail question or litigating a motion to suppress or discussing the disposition of a particular case, anticipated the types of questions that I might have as the judge and had good answers for him. And being prepared and being respectful and having the type of demeanor that Sam has, that Judge Toshka made reference to in a different capacity, came through in the years that I would see Sam as a defense attorney. And these last couple of years, when Sam's been a prosecutor in Middlesex County, he's been in front of me on a lot of cases. Often high-profile cases. They might bring Sam in to handle an arraignment that has some attention to it, or I would also see him just standing in front of me as a judge, just on a regular, whatever the particular cases before the court were that day. And it didn't matter what kind of case it was, because, as a prosecutor, he was always ready to go and he was always fair. And fairness is a huge part of what we do and what we need to do. And it was always reassuring to see Sam in front of me, because no matter what argument he was making, the bottom line, the common theme running throughout it was fairness and honesty. And his demeanor he's got a great demeanor, and he's a great listener, because I can think of a couple of cases where the other side might have made a point and it might have been a good point. And I remember thinking, all right, well, good point by the advocate. And there were a couple of occasions where I can remember Sam conceding, recognizing, the case that was just cited, I agree that case stands for this, this, and this, but Judge, this is why I still think you should do what I'm suggesting. Or he might have a counter to it. And those are the types of arguments that he would make that would require you not only to be prepared, but also to be good on your feet, be good in a trial setting, in a courtroom setting. He's argued litigated motions to suppress in front of me. A recent one comes to mind where I just thought he had it. I didn't know at the time that he had applied for a judgeship, but I remember thinking, wow, that's someone who I could see up here. I know at least one or two trials that Sam's had in front of me, and it doesn't matter what the case is. I always walk away thinking very highly of him. Calm demeanor, even temperament, the types of things that I think would absolutely benefit the judiciary, the legal system, all of us, if he were fortunate enough to be confirmed by this council. I don't do this. I don't come before a council like this that I have such respect for, or write a letter unless I really believe that the nominee would be great in the position that he or she is being considered for. And that's why I can say with no uncertain terms that I'm proud to sit next to this nominee. I think that if he is fortunate enough to be confirmed by this council, that he will do a great job. And if,
Thank you. Your testimony means a lot.
Amen.
Counselor Kennedy.
When I met with him, he told me when he used to go to Albania, his grandfather would have him ride a donkey. Do you know of any other judges with that talent that can ride a donkey?
is a judge allowed to assert the fifth in a hearing like this? I do not, but
That's a unique talent he's bringing to the court.
he has a lot of talents, and I know that if he is fortunate enough to show them off, if he's confirmed, that we'll all feel good about it.
Are you gonna go for a donkey ride with him if he gets on?
I don't see that in the future for me.
I don't think that's the greatest attribute for a judge. Anyone else have a question? Okay, I just want to say you have the best, you couldn't have had any better witnesses to have Justice Costa and Judge Frank, who I have such great respect, and they don't come all the time. So this is really a tribute to you to have them come. And so I hope you're enjoying your retirement. And so good to see you, Judge Frank. I ask about you all the time. Can't find you. You're moving all the time. But no, I thank you. I think, so you have seen him before you. Now, what case comes to mind that was really a difficult one? Very serious, could have been a murder case or child abuse. Can you tell us what you observed?
Well, I mean, and again, I'm terrible with the recall in terms of names. I could certainly look things up, but I remember an arraignment where there was attention to it, and I don't remember exactly, what amount of bail Mr. Zagnori was asking me to consider, but I do remember that it wasn't an amount, it was a reasonable amount, and his arguments I really felt were on point. It wasn't that he was playing to a camera or directing his arguments to anybody other than me. And I just remember that particular instance being an example where I just thought, very highly of him in that regard. And the motion to suppress that was before the court, it was on a car stop, and it, if I remember right, and I just remember during the argument, the evidence had been presented, and I sort of asked the lawyers to give me their summation as to why they think I should do what I want to do. I remember he cited 2 or 3 cases that weren't cases that I had in front of me. I remember asking him, looking up the cases after he cited them, right on point, and I just appreciate that kind of advocacy. And those are 2 things that jump out at me. But the other thing I should say, and I actually meant to say it, and it's important. In a supervisory role in the DA's office, I would often be having a jury trial in front of me, and I would see Sam in the courtroom observing the young lawyer who was on trial, who was doing the trial. And I remember seeing after the fact, I might be walking in the hallway, I would see Sam talking to that lawyer right after the trial. And to me, the mentoring, and Judge Toshka talked about it, having an opportunity, a young lawyer having an opportunity to speak to an experienced practitioner about things they might have done well, things they might want to work on, and things that were observed is, it's invaluable. And doing it right after the fact is huge. And so I just remember, I more often than not seeing that and just thinking that, that young lawyer is getting a real resource by having Sam there to talk. And, you see a lot on the bench. You see the way that people interact in the courtroom. And I see the way that Sam interacts with other prosecutors in his office. I see the way he interacts with opposing counsel, with court staff, with clerks, with court officers, and just A+. He just, those are things that sort of stand out. So I hope that answers your question.
Can I ask you, I mean, these are difficult times in the pandemic. How is he, with the Zoom and everything, how are you seeing him, and how is he making his presentations?
I see it well. I mean, fortunately, more back in the building than before. I mean, we're doing a lot more in the building, but, Zoom created all kinds of challenges, and it was necessary in the sense that, we had to keep the work going and figure out how to do so in a pandemic. But, being prepared is always important, but being prepared during this world we're living in now, if he's ever asked for a further call, I can't remember one because he's always prepared and ready to go, but he'd be on the Zoom and he'd have the answers, and if he didn't have the answers, he would say so. And I just, if I had to list out all the great attributes, demeanor and temperament are way high, and you definitely need it in this world.
You do.
Yeah.
I do think that it's a good thing now we have the mentoring, and I think that's a good thing, and it has worked. I've got some feedback. I think they maybe should be going to some of the older judges could use it too, that mentoring, and it does work. I think that's a good thing. Do you
Yeah.
see that too?
I think, I mean, I love it when another judge comes in the courtroom to observe, and they might come in for some other reason. And we all benefit from having people give us feedback. So, I mean, mentoring is a huge part of,
Well, whoever did it, I want to thank them. I don't know whoever thought of it, but
yeah,
it's a great,
it's a great program. I just
Yeah.
became a judicial mentor and went through the training, and I think it's great.
Yeah.
It does a
well,
lot
for
of
you.
good.
You're a good mentor, I'm sure. Well, listen, thank you very much. I appreciate you both coming, and I guess that'll conclude the questions for the witnesses. And so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And so now, is there anyone here that hasn't spoken who would like to say something? Okay. Is there anyone in opposition? So having heard none, now it's your turn for your presentation.
Thank you, Counselor. First of all, I want to thank the members of the Governor's Council for your time and attention and for considering my nomination. Thank you, Counselor Devaney, for meeting with me last week and also for chairing this hearing. I am appreciative. I want to thank Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito for the trust that they have placed in me with this nomination. I want to thank Bob Ross, Lauren Green Petrino, Emily Gauthier, and Caitlin Babin for their professionalism throughout this process. I want to thank my witnesses, Judge Frank and Judge Tochka. We've talked a lot about mentors. You've both been mentors and role models to me for many, many years. And to have you come here is truly an honor, so thank you. I want to take a quick moment to mention some people who are very important to me who are not here today. That includes my sister, Susie. It includes my sister-in-law, Erin. And it includes my extended family, which is large and very loving and very supportive. And most notably, it includes my children. Jacob, age 13. Elena, aged 11. Daniela, age 9. They're on vacation in South Carolina with their grandparents and cousins, and hopefully they're in the pool or at the beach.
Great.
If they are watching this, whether it's now or sometime in the future, I just hope that they know how much I love them and just how proud of them I am. I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and particularly for the opportunity to give an opening statement and tell you about myself. But I really can't talk about myself without talking about where I come from and how I was raised. Because anyone who knows me knows that every opportunity I've had in my life would not have been possible without the sacrifices and hard work of my parents. My parents grew up poor. They didn't grow up in this country. They didn't have the opportunity to go to college or to pursue higher education. But they did come here and they worked hard. They emphasized the importance of education to us, and they taught us always to be humble. Those are lessons I learned at a very young age, and I try to live by them every single day. Sitting here in this position, I know that so much of who I am is rooted in their experiences and their values, and I want to say thank you to both of them. My father, Hockey, came to the United States in 1968. He came here with a middle school education. He didn't speak a word of English. But what he had was a belief that hard work and dedication would pay off. He started working within days of his arrival. He worked at a shoe factory and then at a house painting company. He went to school at nights at Cambridge Ringen Latin and got his high school diploma, and eventually started his own house painting business, which he operated for 48 years until finally retiring earlier this year. His hard work put 3 kids through college and gave us the chance to pursue our dreams, which is what I'm doing here today. My mother is a homemaker, but I think her preferred job title is grandmother. She was born and raised in a tiny village in the mountains of what was then Yugoslavia. Even now, many years later, she calls herself a village girl. And that's true, but it should not obscure the fact that my mother is an exceptionally intelligent woman who helped run the family business for years and was an academic standout growing up until she ended her education around age 14. But more than that, when I think of my mother, I think of selflessness. Someone who left her home, her family, her friends to start a new life in a new country where she didn't speak the language or know anyone other than her husband. As I get older and I reflect on that, I know and I realize that she didn't do it for her. She did that for me, did that for my brother, She did that for my sister. We weren't even born yet, but she knew that we'd have opportunities in this country that wouldn't exist anywhere else. And she put our interests above hers. My parents settled down in Arlington. It's my hometown. It's where my wife and I have chosen to raise our 3 children. I attended Arlington Public Schools, and then I was admitted to Boston University. At BU, I obtained my bachelor's degree, but more importantly, I met my wife, Kim. And although she was initially immune to my charms, I was eventually able to get her to go out with me. And we've been together for almost 23 years. And just last week, we celebrated our 16th wedding anniversary. I'm grateful for every single day we've spent together, and I would not be here without her love and support. After college, I worked at a civil litigation firm, and I later decided to attend Boston University School of Law. Like a lot of people, I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I went to law school. And when I graduated, I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to do something meaningful, something that mattered, something that would help people. And then I did a clerkship, a 1-year clerkship with the Massachusetts Juvenile Court. And that changed my life. I worked closely with the judges on delinquency matters, child welfare matters, other things that came before the court. And I saw just how important, how meaningful the work was in the trial court. And I fell in love with being in a courtroom. After that clerkship, I joined the Middlesex DA's office, where I had outstanding mentors and colleagues and learned so much about how to be a prosecutor, but also just how to be a lawyer and a professional. I learned how to try a case. I learned the importance of compassion towards crime victims, but also towards defendants. I learned the importance of having common sense and judgment, knowing the value of a case, knowing when someone deserves a break or deserves a second chance. In 2012, I left the DA's office and I joined a criminal defense firm where I had the privilege of working with some of the best attorneys that I've ever known. I ended up working as a defense attorney for just over 6 years, 4 of them for the firm and 2 of them as a sole practitioner. I learned about what it takes to run a law practice, the work and dedication to serve your clients, but also to pay the bills, to keep the lights on, and to always continue to grow your practice. I'm very proud of the work I did as a defense attorney, and I worked on some high-profile cases, but I also worked as a bar advocate in the Middlesex County and Suffolk County. I defended clients from all walks of life, and many of my clients were accused of horrific crimes. But I saw every single day that no matter what someone is accused of, they're a human being. They deserve compassion. They deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. I defended many clients who had substance abuse disorders and histories of trauma and alcoholism. I learned a lot about the nature of addiction, but also recovery. I learned that relapse is part of recovery and that many people in recovery will take 2 steps forward, but then sometimes take 2 steps back, sometimes 6 steps back, sometimes 10. But no matter how many times they falter, we as a society, as a court system, can never give up on those people. In 2019, I returned to public service and I rejoined the Middlesex DA's office in my current role, a regional district court supervisor. I train and supervise prosecutors at the very earliest, most formative stages of their career. I try to be a good role model and I try to be a teacher. And I emphasize the importance of being ethical, being reasonable, and being compassionate. Those are the values that I hope to bring to the bench. I believe and I hope that my professional experiences and my personal background have prepared me well to be a judge on the Boston Municipal Court. And I'm very grateful to be considered for this awesome responsibility. And I welcome any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to first call on Counselor Hurley. Come in soon.
I'm getting here.
Okay.
There I am. Okay. Good morning. Actually,
Good morning, Counselor.
Good afternoon. That was because of nominee Farrell that I was a little bit taken aback by what time it was because he talked for so long. I'm glad that you didn't get on the role that he did. We talked at some length last week, and actually it was this week. And I just wanted to say that you have a very impressive resume. You do have compassion, and I think it's important for the people that we put on the bench to have that compassion and to show it as well. You're also well thought of. I received some calls about you and the great job that you do in the DA's office. So not to belabor the point, I intend to vote for you next week, and I congratulate you on having a great family and a great support system. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Kennedy.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Counselor.
I'm just gonna bring up my pet peeve that I've been bringing up week after week. Happened to me again this week. You spent a lot of time supervising as a district attorney in Middlesex County. It happens in Middlesex County with the people who work for you. It happened in Barnstable this week. Pretrial conditions of release, requirement of a scram, requirement of a drug test. Somebody flunks one. Probation brings it to the DA. They go in front of the judge and get a warrant. And they forget that there's another person involved here, the lawyer for the defendant, who under our rules, as I read them, is supposed to get notice of that. You'd agree with that, right?
I agree with you, Counselor.
Before they go into court, right? Before they even ask for the warrant, right?
I agree.
Unless it's an emergency, right?
I agree.
Most of these aren't emergencies because they get the warrant, they just stop all the testing, and nobody goes and gets them. So it's not an emergency. And then when they do get brought into court or they come into court, the DA doesn't even ask that they be held. So I don't know why this is happening over and over and over throughout the state, that defense lawyers are not being notified, that cases are being brought into court and warrants on their clients. Sometimes they're just wrong. They shouldn't be there at all. What's Judge Zaganori going to do about that?
Unless it's a true emergency, an exigent public safety emergency, that should not be an ex parte hearing. There should be notice to counsel, who presumably would then give notice to the defendant. That should be marked up for a hearing.
Well, I talk to a lot of folks like Judge Tochka and Judge Frank about this all the time, and Judge Costa, who, by the way, texted me a little while ago saying great things about you. Well, she's my friend. And it seems to fall on deaf ears because it keeps happening. Yeah, I blame the DA for going in there and getting the warrant, or probation. It's not really their case. They're just monitoring this pretrial conditions. But I blame the judge because they should know better. And, you know, the reaction I get is, well, I asked, did you notify defense? Did you talk to defense counsel? Did you reach out to defense counsel? I don't know why most of them aren't just summonses. Why you get warrants on people? It can get dangerous. People can get hurt. Police can get hurt. That's what happened to that poor officer down in Barnstable County. That was a warrant for failing conditions of release, as I understood it. It led to his death. So there's just no reason for it. I just don't get it. I'm just hammering it home. It's not about you,
Understand?
but it's just a pet peeve I have. I was in front of Judge Julian in Barnstable Court on Monday. And the first thing he raised on my client's case was he's got a warrant for failing a drug test last week. And my reaction was, I didn't know anything about it. And Judge Julian started asking me about, well, what happened? I said, how do I know? Nobody gave me notice. In that case, by the way, the DA came up to me and says, we don't have enough evidence to go forward on this. We're going to dismiss it. Probably the same DA the week before was didn't get no warrant. I just don't get it. That's my beef. It's not about you. You're great. I'm voting for you. You already
Thank
knew
you.
that. You knew that before you even applied. So we're good.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you.
Counselor Dow?
Thank you. Nice to see you and nice to see your parents. My Italian family is from Bari, so I'm quite familiar with Albania, and had the distinct privilege of visiting Yugoslavia in 1972. So very,
My mother's from originally.
yeah. So shortly after that time, and truly one of the most beautiful countries I've ever seen, especially back. I haven't been back since I was just a kid, but it was stunningly gorgeous. So I haven't had a chance really to speak to you, but the thing that is sort of a lot of people are talking about is you're very young, which you can't help, I suppose, and you have a terrific resume and great legal experience, but do you have enough to be on the bench? Do you have enough life experience to be on the bench?
As far as life experience goes, I believe I do. I mean, I think like anyone, I've had ups and downs in my life, and people around me have had ups and downs, and I think that's part of growing up. I have 3 children. My oldest is going to be going to high school in a year. I consider that life experience, raising 3 children, certainly into the teenage years. As far as my professional experience goes, I think what I've done in my time in practice is pretty extensive. I think I have a diverse background. I won't go through the whole application.
Well,
know
you
my
do.
resume.
You have a very good background, and the work and the writing you've done is quite impressive. And I am a big fan of Marion Ryan, so the fact you work for her is a check point in my box. But I do know there is some concern about that. I don't think it makes you unqualified, but I think it's giving some folks pause. So I just wanted to put that out there in the air instead of having, tiptoeing around it. So there are 3 major issues that I talk about a lot, and I'm sure you're familiar with them. One has become a very du jour issue today, and that is how we treat addictions in addicts. It's one of the reasons I decided to run for governor's council is because I worked with heroin addicts. I was a chaplain in a drug rehabilitation center. And, I'd come home from work with stories that people literally didn't believe. And nobody cared about drug addicts then. I still, frankly, don't think a lot of people care as much as they say they do. It's touched more people's families closer and their friends now, so all of a sudden they're talking about it. But it's a problem that isn't going away. I guess my concern is that I don't think that the people of the Commonwealth, which turns into our electeds, have the stomach to spend the money that it takes to really have successful rehabilitation. Right now, the statistics are 15% of people who are addicted to heroin will survive. It's that low. In putting someone in a 30-day rehab, which is what I was in, is a Band-Aid. You're almost guaranteed to OD when you get out of something like that. So anyway, Judge Georges spoke recently in Worcester about this, and it's something that I've advocated. And I'm happy to see, with his experience in the drug courts, what do you think about sentencing people to rehabilitation rather than to jail?
I think rehabilitation should generally be the focus of what we're trying to do at the BMC level or the district court level. Certainly when addiction is the primary driver of whatever criminal activity is going on, rehabilitation should generally be the first option. Incarceration is a last resort for someone who just poses an immediate public safety threat. I think that's going to be a very small percentage of the defendants who come through the Boston Municipal Court. But what we need to do is, there's things the court can do. We can direct people towards whatever services are out there. We can.
But the challenge is, sorry to interrupt you, attorney, the challenge is the services really aren't out there, and they're very, very limited in what there are. Now, are you familiar with the Angel program?
In Gloucester?
Yes.
Generally, yes.
What do you think about it? And what do you think about implementing that in other parts of the state? It's become a national model for many places.
As I understand it, people can surrender their drugs and they get a mentor and they're directed towards services.
And they get a bed.
Yeah. I mean, the beds, that's the critical issue, and we just don't have enough of them. I mean, it's partly a court system problem, and it's partly a problem of just political will, on a broader level. No, I think that's exactly the model that we need to be, one of the models. I mean, it's never going to be one exclusive way of dealing with addiction, but that's certainly one way of making people feel comfortable looking for help, knowing they're not going to get in trouble, they're not going to get arrested and brought to court, but rather give them the opportunity to come and seek help. Because that's a critical part of recovery, is wanting to get better, as opposed to being told to get better.
Well, it's why the Angel program has a substantially higher success rate than almost any other, I think, than any other program in the state.
So I think that's a great model.
It's a terrific model that my dear friend in DA John Blodgett opposed.
Really?
Oh, very vocally. And yet it is a very workable model because it's taking the punitive out of the equation. We're not punishing people. I live in Gloucester. The way the police treat addiction there is different than any place I've seen in my life. I've lived on 3 continents, on both coasts. I've lived in major cities. the way that our police are trained and they treat addiction is different than anything I've ever seen. And the model was thought up by a former police chief who, you know, was frankly very conservative, but realized we're not arresting our way out of this problem, and putting people in jail isn't going to help. In fact, it's a, you know, jails and prisons are hotbeds of addiction. As you probably know, I'm assuming you go into them on a regular basis.
I certainly did when I was a defense attorney,
Right.
I mean, multiple days a week, absolutely.
Yeah. You know, no one's goal in life is to become an alcoholic or a drug addict or a heroin addict. It happens. You don't take heroin, it takes you. But I guess what I'm asking for is to, if you ascend to the bench, to be creative, and I mean really creative, to the point where people may strongly disagree with you, to come up with other solutions, because what we're doing isn't working, and we know it. The solutions cost a heck of a lot more money, and there is no political will on the part of politicians or the people, frankly, to pay for it. And that's just the truth. I mean, I know this business. I've worked in it. And it's the sad thing about addiction, and I think why it's impacted, you know, white families and white middle class and upper class families so hard, is they realize there's almost no coming back from it. So anyway, I'm just imploring you to be open-minded and think about it. It doesn't absolve people of crimes, but you know, most people are in jail today for addiction, for mental health, and frankly, because they're homeless. And some of those reasons are what other things I've mentioned, but you know, if you don't have a place to lay your head, the chances are pretty good you're going to get yourself in some trouble, which may put you back into the system or into the system. You know, that's a whole nother issue that I can give you my diatribes of what I think and how we can resolve some of those issues. So that's my thoughts on addiction, and what I hope and implore you to do more research and learn about, and encourage you know, others in the criminal justice system to be really creative. You know, we're not going to succeed all the time with creative ideas. You know, we had a lot of kinks to work out with the Angel program, but it has been madly successful. And part of it is because people are, you know, it would happen in Salem quite frequently that they would arrest people doing crazy things in public. And the cops would say, "What were you thinking?" And they'd say, "I'm trying to get to Gloucester."
Wow.
They'd say, "I'm trying to get myself arrested so I can get to Gloucester because I know I'm going to get help there." That's unbelievable. Really unbelievable. Anyway, so that's my speech on that. The other issue that I'm very concerned about, and I'm sure you're up on it, is LGBTQI plus people. A study came out last week by DCF. 45% of the kids, young people in this community or identify in this community have attempted to commit suicide. That's abysmal.
It's horrifying.
It's horrifying. And it's horrifying to any adult who has an ounce of thoughtfulness or compassion in them, because some frankly don't. And that's the reason why some of these kids are in trouble. You know, when you're in a marginalized community and you feel safer living on the streets than you do at home or in foster care, we've got a very serious public health issue, frankly, because it manifests itself into pregnancy. It manifests itself into HIV/AIDS. It manifests itself into sex workers. And that is just a very, very dangerous thing that is on the incline right now instead of being eviscerated. So what is your experience working with those communities?
I've had those cases both as a prosecutor, and I'm sure I've had clients who come from the LGBT community. I can think of a couple of cases, one case in particular where I handled a dangerousness hearing where two young men had essentially attacked a gay man for being gay. It's obviously horrifying. I certainly, there's no place for that, to put it simply. I think the solution, or not the solution, but the approach that you have to have as a judge is one, respect and empathy for everybody. That includes non-binary people and trans people, respecting their identities, whatever it may be. And certainly as a judge, trying to find whatever resources there are, because you're right, a lot of the societal issues sort of push folks into homelessness or even sex trafficking or whatever the
Right.
case may be. If a defendant comes to me sort of from that posture, I need to be compassionate. I need to be empathetic and understand not just, okay, they're here in front of me on this criminal charge. How did they get here? And how can we sort of change course? So I think as a judge, you really have to be keyed into that.
Yeah, and you have to learn about the resources in that very particular subculture in community. Listen, trans kids that identify as non-binary or transgender, even adults, that's a very tough issue for a lot of people to get their heads around. It's something that's always existed. It just wasn't spoken a lot about, and people weren't out about it, but they are now, and it's a real thing. And my colleagues have heard me say many times, as adults, as elected officials, as lawyers, as judges, we're responsible for the safety of these people. We live in what is, and so far as continues to be, the greatest country in the world. But if we can't take care of our children and our young people and our, if we can't take care of these vulnerable people, that is the mark of a great society. So I do encourage you again to be mindful. There is training in the courts. The courts have done some very good work on this. There's a lot more work to be done. I'd be happy to talk to you about resources in Boston that could be helpful for you to learn.
I'd be grateful for that.
But, using pronouns, the right pronouns of what someone wants to be addressed as, putting them in the right prison if they identify as male or female for safety issues. I mean, it's a very complex issue. And it's one of the reasons why, frankly, why do you want to be a judge?
I care about the work that's done in the trial courts, particularly at the BMC level, the district court level. I've spent my entire career in the trial court, but huge chunks of it specifically at the district court level. And I think the work they do, as difficult as it is, as frustrating as it can be, I think it does help people. And I think it makes a difference. And I think as the judge, you really can make a positive impact on the people who come into the courthouse and also on the community. And that's my answer, is to help people.
Oh, no, and I'm not disputing that you would, because you clearly have the ability, I'm sorry, your wife, I think, is a teacher, but you have the ability to make a great deal of money that you're not going to make as a judge. Our judges are getting paid what, a good first year coming out of one of the top 10 or 20 schools makes in a good firm, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's
I
accurate,
mean,
yeah.
you've already paid your dues. You could be going back to some of these other firms and doing really well for the next 10 years and then applying. And I'm not saying do that. I'm just saying that the call to public service, I believe is a real call. And when I see somebody as young as you, I have to ask why you're doing it, because my suspicion is it is part of that call. Everything you've shared with us doesn't make me believe that you come from some wealth that we don't know about, and in that, there's a pot of gold in, someplace in Macedonia or other places hidden waiting for you up the hill with the donkey. But it is something to think about.
Mhm.
There is sacrifice for your family, not just financially. There is sacrifice of at a young age. If you ascend to the bench, you will at some point make a decision that will be unpopular, maybe undesirable. Maybe somebody will be injured. Maybe somebody will be killed as a result of something that you've done. You're not God. You're a judge. You don't know. I mean, people are human. You're just one guy, right? But in the contentious society we live in today, where you pick up the Herald and some of these other papers, and they're just ripping everyone to shreds. for nonsense half the time to sell newspapers. I mean, it's discouraging, frankly. But I hope that you have had the conversation with your wife and your kids that they may see or hear things that are unkind in their lives, in your life, could be at some time threatened, or people protesting outside of your home or your court because they don't agree with what a judgment that you made or a sentence, you know, that you passed down. But this is why we have separation of powers, in my opinion. I don't always agree with what judges do. I don't know why they've done it. I don't know why they've read the law the way that they have, but I'm not the judge, so I don't have the facts in front of me, right? I'm just reading the newspaper. But I do think it's very important for you to have that support. You seem to have a wonderful family support system.
I do. I really do.
And I think that's a very important thing because your parents are beaming and full of pride and everything. And in the deep hurt that it would be if something was said against you, it's not something any parent ever wants to hear. So that's a conversation to have and to continue to have with your folks, you know, with your parents, with your support system, with your spiritual support system, with your everyone, you know, that cares about you. Because at some point, if you go to the bench in what could be almost 30 years, you're going to need it. And you're quite brave to apply at such a young age.
Thank you.
You are.
Thank you.
So the last issue that I talk a lot about, that I care a lot about, it's a personal issue to me, but any issue is personal to me just because I'm a member of the Commonwealth, are people who have different abilities. Now, that could be that they are in a chair, that they have a physical, what we would call a different ability or disability, or that they have a cognitive disability. They could be, you know, cognitively slow. They could be what has been referred to in the past of being on the spectrum. And a lot of times, particularly with segment of society of people that we know have more of these cognitive abilities that we now sort of, you know, paint as the spectrum, right? The behavior of some of those folks, it may not be what one would necessarily call appropriate in a courtroom. Have you ever had any clients like that or dealt with any folks in that community?
I have, and actually, I'll point to two cases if that's okay. When I was a prosecutor, actually, the first jury trial that I ever did in the Superior Court was an unarmed robbery and an assault and battery on a person with a disability. That's the statute. And the victim was a young man who had very obvious physical impairments. He had limited movement of his arms and just facially, he just things that would be obvious the moment you meet him. And a woman who had her own addiction issues had befriended him and essentially set him up, and they robbed him, or that was the allegation at least. He also had cognitive issues. He just, you know, I couldn't tell you what his diagnosis was now. I'm sure I could years ago, but just he was someone who you had to be very, very patient with, very sometimes repetitive with. But the key was to be empathetic, but also very patient, take your time. So that'd be one example. And another client I had who was charged with a very serious crime, a sex offense in the Superior Court. He had been a DMH client for probably his entire adult life, maybe even before that. And again, I couldn't put my finger on exactly what, you know, I don't think it was a question of being on the spectrum. I think he had sort of permanent cognitive, you know, but he was someone, again, he had to be very, very patient. And with him, he would really fixate on things that just weren't relevant at all to the case. And I'd go visit him at the jail and we'd have the same conversation over and over. But that's okay. I mean, I think with folks like that, you have to meet them where they're at. And if those issues were important to him, they had to be important to me. So yes, I do have experience dealing with folks who have physical and mental impairments. And I think the golden rule is just be patient and kind of, like I said, meet them where they're at, meet them at their level.
And do you see that? I mean, I can just see being in the BMC in a very busy court, you know, where you're under time constraints and you've got a docket, you've got to keep moving or get cleared. That can be a challenge. Do you consider yourself a patient person? You're the wrong guy to ask.
I am. I'd like to ask my wife. She would say no. My kids would definitely say no. I think professionally I am. I think my temperament, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I think I'm a pretty calm guy when it comes to just being in court and trying cases and everything that goes on in a courthouse. I think you have to be patient. And as much as we want to get through the list and, on a busy Monday morning, you have to take every case one by one. You have to take every defendant as an individual. And not gonna rush someone through who doesn't understand what's happening just because I have 40 other cases.
Well, and also I'm always clear, it doesn't absolve someone
Right.
of a crime if they've committed a crime, but it does mean how you treat the case could be different. And it does mean the sentencing may have to be done with some different care.
Sure. I think it should inform the way you deal with that person.
Right.
And I think you have to be mindful about their particular issues.
Right.
That gets to sentencing.
And again, there's a safety issue,
Agreed.
putting folks like that in a jail cell or in a prison cell. There are some real, very serious safety issues. Yeah, and I think one of the next, we can't talk about diversity if we don't talk about disability, because that's part of it. And for some people, disability, so many words today, you're not sure which word to use anymore, but different abilities, or people in wheelchairs, or people that can't hear well, or they can't see, or they have trouble speaking. Most of us will be impaired as an adult at some point in our lives. Some of us already are becoming that, our glasses, our hearing, but our ability to be mobile. But I think more and more judges are going to be dealing with some of these issues, some of these, frankly, just accessibility issues. Do you think, I know you're being appointed to BMC, do you think you would actually be sitting there, or do you think they may send you to the hinterlands?
My understanding is that I'd be in the Boston Municipal Court, but that encompasses all different divisions.
Right.
So in the city of Boston, but it could be
Yeah.
Dorchester, Roxbury, Central, West Roxbury, East.
Which is, the reason I ask is, those are all places that are really easily or fairly easily accessible by public transportation, which is a concern of mine because we have no access to justice or justice for all if we can't get to the court.
Agreed.
Right? And so the idea of community courts is personal to me because I live on an island. And believe it or not, I used to think Gloucester was a peninsula until I lived there, but it is actually an island. And our next court is 26 miles away. And although we do have a train, as I would call it, the choo-choo train, it doesn't run on a very regular basis or in a dependable manner. At this point, we're working on it. But that's a real issue. It becomes a very complex issue. And so even though it may not impact you so much where you may be sitting, I hope that you would be a champion for others, particularly in other parts of the state. People in the western part of the state, just to get on a bus to get places, it can be very challenging. And if you have children and you've got to bring them with you, or if there's only one bus that goes and it's a domestic issue and there's the perpetrator and the victim on the same bus or train car, these are real things for people. And if it's not on time and you're late for court, or you're late for your drug test.
What I can say to that, actually, so one of the courts I've supervised these last 2.5 years is the Cambridge District Court, which is not in Cambridge, it's in Medford.
Right.
So if you're someone who lives in Harvard Square, Central Square, and you don't own a car, that means you're taking the red line to the
Right.
orange line, to Wellington Station. You have to walk about 15 minutes, take your life in your hands as you cross Route 28. You get to the courthouse, maybe it's a 5-minute hearing, and then you get sent back, it's another hour and a half.
Yeah.
So no, I'm very mindful of those issues. I think Zoom court is a positive step in providing access to justice for folks like that.
It really is, actually. I'm sorry, go ahead. I
No,
didn't mean to
that's my
step on
point.
you.
I'm mindful of that issue. I think Zoom is part of the solution. And also just maybe cutting down on unnecessary court dates, because for a lot of folks, even financially, just getting on the train, but some of the people we deal with.
Oh, it's a huge struggle. It's a huge struggle to the point where I've actually, had conversations with some of the justices on the state Supreme Court about, should we be providing vouchers to people to even show up? I mean, I know it sounds absurd to those of us who have things, but a lot of people don't. I mean, we're arguing about a $15 minimum wage in Massachusetts. You can't live on $15 in Massachusetts with one job. I mean, it's a joke. It's an insult to the working man, really. And people are working, you know, and everyone says, oh, well, the people aren't at work. Well, they are if you're paying them. They've gone to jobs that pay. You read, you know, I read about 5 newspapers every day, you know, and I read everything I've always have. But, you know, when you read the Wall Street Journal and you're seeing it in the Wall Street Journal, which is pretty conservative paper, right?
Sure.
When they're talking about the change of work and how the pandemic has really taken people from service industries out of it because they're sick of being abused. And, you know, waiters and waitresses, what's the base pay for a waiter and waitress in Massachusetts? $2.33 an hour plus tips? Really?
Right.
You know, you can make more money walking dogs. You can. And this is what's happened. This is one of the things people, it's not just that they're getting some money from the government. The fact is they're sick of being abused. And they've gone on to other things. So, you know, that's another one of my speeches for you all to take in. Anyway, you have a fine resume. I do want you to think about the things that I've talked to you about today, because we really didn't have a chance to discuss it. And I may want to speak to you again about some of that.
Happy to do that.
I think in the court that you would be going to, those are very, very real every day. It's a very quick pace. It's a very, you know, it's the people's court, and you're really going to be seeing, the best and the worst of humanity. And no one wants to go to court. It's the most important day of somebody's life. If they're in court, it doesn't really matter what it was for. May I ask you, and if you're not comfortable answering, you don't have to. Did you go to public school
I
when you were
did
younger?
Arlington Public Schools, including Arlington High School.
Yeah. The reason I ask is I think it's very important for folks, particularly since you're first generation, to go back into the schools and talk to kids about your journey.
I would love to. I would love to.
And I will be calling on you for that.
Sure.
I have experience doing that with different judges, and it's the difference it makes in the students you never expect that you're going to reach. It's absolutely profound.
I would love to. You have my number.
So I do have your number. Anyway, thank you very much
Thank
for your
you,
time.
Counselor.
I
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor DePaula.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Counselor.
Just quickly jumping off of the last thing that Counselor Duffin spoke about, visit alternative schools too, where the kids who probably you saw in juvenile court are. They desperately need folks who they can look to as models and who will tell them that they have a chance to get there. So I hope you'll consider that too. And I wanted to start you have experience as a juvenile court clerk, and you also have experience in the child abuse division of the Middlesex office. So I want to ask you a couple questions about that. The first, in the juvenile court, care and protection cases, abuse and neglect, CRAs. What would be the consequence of there being a significant backlog in the juvenile court?
In terms of care and protection cases?
Across the spectrum, but if that's where your mind goes first, yeah, what would be the consequence of having significant backlogs?
You leave children in either uncertain situations or potentially in unsafe situations. There are a huge number of kids who are in some type of transitional placement, whether it's some type of group home or just a DCF placement. The presumption, as it should be, is always on family reunification. And if you have a backlog and those cases aren't getting heard, aren't getting addressed, then you're delaying that. And I think again, assuming that the family is fit to have the child, assuming that the family is at a place where they can have the child.
Right.
Every day that kid is separated from his parents or from whoever the proper caretaker is.
Right.
There's trauma involved in that. You don't get those days back. You don't get that development back.
So you have the risk of a child continuing to be exposed to danger.
Absolutely.
You have kids in group homes you mentioned, and working in juvenile court, I'm sure perhaps you're familiar with the phenomenon of kids fleeing group homes.
Absolutely.
Often because they're unsafe. And then going back to court. And when they're in court, these are kids who haven't had an adult they can trust. Strike that. A lot of the adults in their lives who they should have been able to trust have betrayed them in the most grotesque ways, in the most scarring ways. And so as someone who's worked with these kids as an attorney, as someone who's been an educator in alternative school settings, they're not willing to open up, even to the lawyer. They do not trust the lawyer. So I know that the kids going before the juvenile court are not having their full story told. And I'm not blaming the court per se, and I'm certainly not blaming the judge per se, but someone in the system needs to be doing a better job of figuring out how to build relationships with these kids. I ask about the backlog. Did you know that in Worcester County, we have had such a backlog over the years that actually one of our senators, Senator Moore, successfully advocated to have an additional juvenile court judge added to Worcester County. Were you aware of that?
I was not.
Were you aware that that seat has been vacant for over a year since before I got on the council? And we have care and protection cases building up in Worcester County, which has one of the highest rates of care and protection cases in the Commonwealth. Does that seem right to you?
It does not, no.
Doesn't seem right to me either. It seems like we're leaving our most vulnerable children behind in the middle of the state, and probably elsewhere too. Councillor Duff was talking about being creative and finding solutions to some of the problems that extend well beyond the purview of the judiciary, but perhaps the judiciary is one place where there can be creative solutions. Around the juvenile court in Worcester, last week, there was an article in the Worcester Telegram in which Judge Erkson, the chief juvenile judge in Worcester, commented on this fact, on what's happening. I thought that was rather brave of her to speak to the press about that and the conditions in the juvenile court. To me, that's an example of a judge using the platform to do something, because there's no consequences to her for having done that. I don't think there'd be consequences to you for speaking out on some of the issues that you see that you think you can make a difference with. You've worked with court-appointed clients. You talked about that a little bit. You mentioned in your application language barriers. We heard about, in some cases, various literal matters of physical access to justice, sensory access to justice. And Councillor Duff was also talking about the trauma of being in court, right? And especially in my experience, it can be even more so for folks who are immigrants or do with that language barrier, who may not even know what's going on, may be intimidated or afraid to assert themselves, right? So I wonder if you could specify, like, as a judge, you're aware of the phenomenon. How do you tackle it?
I think a big part of it is just how you interact with people, even just welcoming them to the court in a sort of non-combative way. Not to say that you make small talk, but I think you can reach out to folks, say, how are you today? Just little things like that, I think, can make a difference.
And I think so many people need the context that, you know, with the docket you're working through, it's hard to remember to take the time for that context. You're relatively young, as we heard. So you get on the bench. How thick is your skin? So you talked a little bit about folks experiencing trauma who end up in court. Trauma dysregulates folks. There was a case recently that the SJC overturned out of a juvenile court where a 16-year-old girl told off the judge and the judge held her in contempt. What's your threshold for contempt?
Sky high.
And I'm worried because, and I'm strike that, I'm not worried. To a younger, potentially younger judge, to me, I feel like there could be an implicit kind of, I need to prove myself thing, right? And I want to have control of the courtroom. Now, obviously that would backfire over time, right? You'd get that reputation, but what would be your threshold?
My threshold for holding someone in contempt is sky high. And honestly, sitting here, it's hard for me to even imagine a situation where I'd hold an attorney in contempt. I think, or a litigant.
A litigant, yeah, would be my primary.
I think the approach should always be incremental, whether it's have a second call, go in the hallway, calm down. I think 9 times out of 10, that'll calm people down. Or get off the bench. Don't give them an audience. I think particularly, I know you referenced, I think it's the Ulani case. If you're dealing with a young person, whether it won't be a juvenile most likely, but a young adult, I think the key is to de-escalate the situation and not be part of the problem.
Absolutely.
Especially if they have a history of trauma like you talked about. Because then I think if you come on too harshly, there's going to be a counter. You're going to make the situation worse.
Right.
So I think incrementally and, use every available option to avoid finding someone in contempt. And I really have a hard time imagining, you never know what could happen, but I really have a hard time imagining ever finding someone in contempt.
I hope so. So the last thing I want to ask you about is you talked about in your application trying to balance public safety and also the rehabilitation We heard talk about substance abuse disorder, and then there's also the concurrent, the dual diagnoses of this. You have the substance abuse, and then you have the other underlying mental health challenge. And you say to the extent possible, the sentence should address the underlying causes of defendant's criminal activity. That's great. Individualized to a particular defendant based on the nature of the offense, his current circumstances, and his personal history. So I'm wondering how, when you think about sentencing especially, how does personal history come into play, both in terms of actual criminal involvement and also personal history, maybe some childhood trauma along the lines we discussed?
So I think you have to be responsive to all that and be mindful of all that. So I'll take their history with the court, their personal history with the court. You're very often going to have someone before you who's been on probation, sometimes multiple times. Sometimes it worked well, sometimes it didn't.
Right.
So I think you have to consider, and you do this by talking to the attorney and talking to the probation officer, what has worked for this particular person, what hasn't. If we're talking about addiction, there are some folks who love AA or NA.
Sure.
There's some people who find it unhelpful and even counterproductive. So I think part of it is finding out what's worked, what hasn't. As far as their personal history goes, certainly if they have a history of trauma, to the extent that we can, we want to address that, whether it's mental health counseling, a mental health evaluation, something. We don't want to just tell people stay off drugs and send them home. It's not going to work.
Because ultimately we want to solve the problem, right?
I think
Because
so.
I don't want to pay 70 grand a year to keep someone in a cage, right? I doubt anyone in the room does, other than the most egregious violent criminals, right? So around the issue of sentencing and around the issues you were just talking about, how do you feel about sentencing guidelines? Do you feel like you would use those as a resource?
I don't think I'd give them a lot of weight. I don't believe there are any current sentencing guidelines at the district court or Boston Municipal Court level, but I think it's not to say that they support one size fits all, but I think as a judge, every case is so unique. Every defendant is so unique. And I suppose they promote uniformity on some level, but no two cases are the same. And I think a judge really has to ultimately deal with the case that's in front of them at a particular time. So, if there were sentencing guidelines, I would consult with them if I thought that was appropriate or if it was, but I'm not sure that would be the determining factor for me.
Do you feel mandatory minimum sentences are appropriate?
I don't, especially in the district court and the BMC.
So when you consider someone's prior record and you're looking at the charges and you're considering, for example, the Massachusetts Sentencing Commission's list of mitigating factors in sentencing include the defendant's criminal history category overstates the seriousness of the defendant's prior record. Do you think that if you saw that would be a mitigating factor for you in your sentencing?
The mitigating factor being that the
defendant's criminal history, prior criminal history, overstates the seriousness of the defendant's prior record.
Yeah, I think sometimes we try to quantify a criminal record. Like you get 2 points for this. I dealt with that a lot in federal court where you get 2 points for a certain type of conviction, 4 points.
Right.
Quantifying things is not helpful.
Right.
Looking at it holistically, using your judgment, that's what a judge should do.
What are some of the reasons besides trauma that one might consider a prior record to be not necessarily primary in evaluating a defendant's?
I think certainly if there are charges that we no longer, marijuana charges are no longer prosecuted, so I'm not going to give them much weight at all. If I have a reason to think that it's someone who maybe came into contact with police at a younger age, maybe because of, reasons out of their control, maybe the neighborhood they lived in, or just for whatever reason, we know that certain groups of folks come into contact with the police at younger ages. So I think those are a couple of examples.
And I was going to ask, because the Sentencing Commission also offers the defendant's residence in a poor minority neighborhood with deep police penetration causes overstatement of the seriousness of the criminal record. And I guess, so for example, on things like weapons charges, we see Black and Latino defendants getting about 120 days longer sentences when you control for the factors we're able to. It's like 155 or something if you don't control. And my last question is, you talked about second chances. When you look at the big picture of the system and someone's been out of the system for 10, 15, 20 years, and the record follows them, right? The record follows them. And so one way to address that, perhaps, strike that. Would you agree? Someone like that who's been a productive member of society, served their time long ago, and the record yet continues to create a barrier in one way or another as they advance in their life. Do you think in the big picture of the system that a pardon either historically has been or could be an effective way to provide that second chance for someone who's demonstrated such a commitment to improvement?
I do. I think that's why governors have that power.
Do you know how many pardons have been issued under the current administration?
I think it's a very low number.
It's zero. It's zero. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Counselor.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Counselor Iannello.
Thank you very much.
Well, this is.
Thank you
Counselor
very much.
Iannello.
Appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Counselor.
Now, you were an assistant DA, Middlesex County. Your first stint was 2006 to 2012.
That's correct.
Yeah, so about 6 years.
Yes,
You're there, and I assume you tried many cases.
a fair amount, yes.
And that was in the district court or both?
4 years in the district court, 2 years in the Superior Court.
Okay. And you did that until 2012. And then after that, you worked for Jay Carney and Ann Basil. And you did that until 2016.
Correct.
Now, you were the managing attorney
At,
in
so
at the second,
at the second firm, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yep,
and just with Jay at that point.
that's correct.
What does that mean, managing attorney?
So it meant I dealt with assignments to other attorneys. We always had at least one or two other associates, sometimes a law student, sometimes a receptionist. So it meant doling out assignments, keeping people on task, making sure they were meeting their deadlines. It also included a lot of the sort of business side of things, making sure that billing went out once a month, making sure the accounts are reconciled, working with the bookkeeper, all the things you do to keep the lights on, candidly.
Yeah, I get that. That's where I was coming to. You'd be in charge of make sure there's enough money for the payroll, the electric bill, okay, I got it. Then after that, you left them.
I did.
And then you were by yourself. Is that right?
Yes.
No,
I was sole
yeah,
practitioner.
sole practitioner for, give or take, a couple of years.
About 2 years and a few
Yeah.
months, yep.
And how did that work out?
I enjoyed the work. Candidly, I didn't really enjoy the business side of things. As I'm sure you know, it has a tendency to sort of take over. And for me, I always loved being a lawyer. I never really wanted to be a businessman. So that's the aspect that I didn't particularly enjoy.
I got it. I'm the opposite. I haven't been to court in years. I'm like the businessman.
Ah,
Okay. But then you went back to the DA. So you're at the DA's office, then you work for Connie and this whatever. And now you're back again to the DA's office.
correct.
And what made you go back there?
Part of what we talked about,
Yeah.
just not particularly wanting to run a law practice. I had always liked being a prosecutor. I had left the first time around largely for financial reasons. We'd had our third kid and we'd bought a house. I was able to go back in sort of a management role. And I like public service. I like being a member of a team. And it was a unique opportunity to supervise folks in the district court. And I decided to take it.
Yeah. The one thing that I always concerned about in talking to lawyers, I don't care if you've been a lawyer for a long time or, a couple of years. You got bills to pay, like we all have bills to pay at home. You got depending on your arrangement at the firm, you have to pay the electric bill, you got to pay the rent, the office supplies. So, and you've been a lot, not your whole life, but a decent amount in the public sector, being at the DA's office. And you're not concerned about those bills. You don't care about the office supplies or the rent. It doesn't concern you. But my question is, like I said, it's a lot of lawyers. They're struggling out there. When it comes to the issue of granting a continuance, the case has been on 3 times. Now it's the 4th time. Lawyer comes before you. I don't know who's asked for the continuance the other 3 times. And now the lawyer comes and says, files a motion, maybe a day or 2, a week before. And then he appears before you, and you get the feeling that, okay, he wants a continuance because tomorrow, the day of the hearing of the trial or the motion, Mr. Green's coming in with and he's going to pay him. And if he doesn't go to the arraignment for Mr. Green, he's the guy with the money, the new client. He might lose that client. But it's already been on 3 times. What do you do in that situation? And this lawyer doesn't have a partner. So he can't do what you did at the DA's office and say, hey, Joe, hey, Mary, want to handle this for me? He's all by himself. What are you going to do in that situation?
I think you have to be understanding to people who are trying to run a law practice and run a business. I think I'd be someone who'd be inclined to grant a continuance, again, based on those limited facts, but I think you have to be mindful of just not only people's professional obligations, including bringing money in, which is a reality of the profession, but also helping people balance their personal, their personal lives too, because that can be
Yeah.
really difficult.
Yeah,
from
so you
experience.
think under my scenario, case has been on 3 times, and it's legitimate, you believe the attorney, that he's got another matter and an arraignment, he wants to be there, that you more likely than not, I'll make it easy, under my facts, you would grant that continuance.
I think I'd be more likely to grant it. Obviously there are more facts. If the defendant's sitting in jail, that changes the equation. If something
Well,
like-
yeah, but in that situation, obviously, the attorney representing the defendant wouldn't be asking for.
Right,
He would,
right,
wouldn't.
right.
Now, you said the personal life, I don't know, within the last, time flies, but within the last year, we had someone sitting in that seat. And I said, what are you doing? Again, it was a continuance type question, because I hear a lot about this. And I said, what if somebody had a case on, and next week, unbelievable, the husband or the wife, I forget what he says, I'm taking it to Bermuda. This is a true story. It's a true story. Next Thursday, 25th wedding anniversary, right? Pretty good. And he asked her, I forget who asked, somebody asked for the continuance, and the nominee here, I asked the same question, would you grant the continuance? And she said, it was a woman, and she said, no. I go, why? Well, the husband should know the schedule of the wife, or the wife should know that. I go, you want to surprise her? I don't think I would grant it. Seriously? Yeah, on the personal level like that. I mean, I think I know your answer, but I thought I knew this answer. I was wrong. What would you do in that
I
situation?
think I'd be inclined to allow that continuance. You have to be respectful of, well, I
You
would be.
think?
I would allow it. You have to be respectful of people's personal lives, and you have to allow for a certain level of unpredictability and just the things that come up in life. So
I
I would
agree.
allow that.
Now, like I said, I don't go to court, but I've heard from Counselor Kennedy in Juvenile. By the way, Kennedy's a big supporter of yours,
I appreciate
big
that.
supporter. And, sometimes, I'm not going to name the judge, there's one judge in particular, these guys they're everywhere. They got an assented to motion to continue the case. Let's assume it was on, whatever, August 28th. And the judge says, no, you got to argue the motion in person. There they go. They got to take time out of their busy schedule, and they got to go to wherever, and they got to argue the motion. My impression is 99.9% of the judges, I'll make it easy. First time on, sent it to motion, they're granting the continuance. This particular judge made him come to the court and argue the motion to continue. Your thought?
I think if it's assented to, I think there should be a mechanism where you can allow that motion without the parties having to come in. I think a judge can allow that on the papers, and it's really not respectful of people's time to require them to come to court for something that is probably just more administrative than.
I totally agree. I mean, it's going to cost the client, who may not have a lot of money, most clients, most people don't have a lot of money, going to have to pay the lawyer to argue for a continuance. It takes time to get to the courtroom, you wait around, that seems to me to be totally unnecessary. Now, what about, these are difficult times with the COVID. What are you doing? The lawyer has a case on for trial next week, and he says, files a motion, I haven't been vaccinated. I don't feel comfortable doing this trial. I'm one of those people who likes to get close to the jury box, the sidebar. I feel, number one, I could get infected, even though I know I'm not vaccinated, or I could infect other people. I'm a sole practitioner. I don't have anyone else like you as an assistant DA. Are you granting a continuance under that scenario?
I would. I think, as an officer of the court, if someone comes before me and says, I'm not comfortable, we're obviously in an unprecedented, hopefully once in 100 years, health emergency. And we can't force people to get vaccinated, and we can't inquire about their health history. So if they come to me, again, as an officer of the court in good faith and say, I'm just not comfortable doing it, I don't think it's appropriate for me to essentially override that personal health choice.
I appreciate that. I asked Dolly that question. Talked to him last week, and he says, yeah, you got to err in the side of caution. You just can't,
Sure.
can't do it. I appreciate that. When I first got out of law school, it was a long time ago, I did court appointments for about, I don't know, about 5 years. Things could be totally different now. But in those days, when there was a bail issue, a judge would always, 90%, 95% follow the recommendation of the assistant DA. Has that changed? What's the situation today? You were a DA for a number of years.
So if I understand your question, are judges just going along with whatever the DA requests?
Not exactly, but
deferential to the
generally,
DA?
yeah. Does
No,
that happen?
I don't think that's what happens in the majority of cases. I really don't. I think
Okay.
most, obviously some judges have tendencies one way or the other. That's normal. That's to be human. But no, I think most judges will look at it and consider the arguments of the two sides and, apply the factors under Section 58. So no, I don't think judges are sort of reflexively going along with the prosecutor.
And I assume that's the same answer when it comes to sentencing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I think maybe who knows why,
Mhm.
but there's less pressure if they agree with the assistant DA. Because if something happens while the defendant is out on bail, hey, that was a recommendation of the ADA. But I'm glad to hear from you that that's not the situation. I'm a strong believer in rehabilitation, if possible, over incarceration. Your thoughts on that?
I would agree. I think rehabilitation is going to be the preferred approach in virtually every case in the BMC. I think there's a small number of cases where incarceration as a last resort, it needs to be part of the discussion to protect public safety. But again, that's a small percentage of the cases. I think we need to stay focused on rehabilitation. These are folks who, even in the district court, even the BMC, they're going to reenter society at some point. And we need to plan for that and give them the tools to hopefully get rehabilitated.
I agree with that too. And a lot of times, I assume on drug cases, someone's on probation, I don't know, a year, 2 years. They got to take the urine test, however, with probation, and they fail. And again, I'm not sure of even the terminology because I don't do this anymore, but the probation officer or somebody could recommend a probation violation. Then they have to come back in front of you. And the original sentence was whatever it was. I don't even know if they have suspended sentences anymore. The option is he violated the terms of probation, you can sentence the person. Your thoughts on that? When people, especially in the drug, that's when they violate it once and now twice and now 3 times.
Mhm.
Well, what are you going to do on that?
I think if someone's violation is only addiction, only drug use, and they're not presenting some other public safety concern.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but a lot of those drug uses, they're committing a robbery because of the drugs.
Right,
So the offense could be B&E,
right.
but it's because of the drug.
But if the violation is just the use of drugs, I think we'd look at other ways of rehabilitating them, figure out what's working, what isn't working, why are you back here? But incarceration, again, it should be for public safety. And if the person is not sort of presently posing a threat to public safety, I think I'd err on the side of rehabilitation and just trying to be more creative with probation.
Oh, that's good. Because my feeling is for people to succeed, you're gonna fail sometime. You're not just gonna automatically succeed. Part of succeeding is you're gonna have some failures on the way. So I like that. I know at the DIA, that's the Department of Industrial Accidents. They have whatever, I won't get into what you call them because you're not gonna know what that means. But what they do at the Department of Industrial Accidents, that's the workers' comp board.
Mhm.
That's the people who get hurt at work. What happens because of COVID-19, if one of the lawyers on either side, whether it's the lawyer for the employee or the lawyer for the employer, or it's the person who gets hurt, if they don't want to come to the Department of Industrial Accidents, they can do their conference by Zoom or webcam, whatever it is. And at the DIA, they've designated, I believe, I was talking to Judge Hernandez, he's the senior judge, every Tuesday is, we'll call it Zoom, I don't know if it's Zoom or webcam. So if a case is on, on whatever Thursday and they can't do it, the following Tuesday. Little nightmare for scheduling, but they do it. Same scenario with you. I have a motion on and I don't want to do it. Can they do it by Zoom, webcam, or whatever they do?
Hmm.
What's your thoughts on
So
that?
is your question whether I would allow
Yeah.
the parties to agree to a motion on Zoom?
Yeah, and is that, can you even do that now?
I think it depends on the type of motion, and particularly in a criminal case, everybody would have to sign off on that, but particularly the defendant, because it implicates all sorts of due process rights.
Well, I'm really talking about in that situation, criminal, I'm talking about the defense.
I think if it's an evidentiary hearing, that's really hard to do by Zoom. But if it's a legal motion, a discovery motion, something that's really purely argument and both parties are on board, I don't think there's any reason we
Well,
can't do that
a
on
lot
Zoom,
of times both parties aren't on board.
right?
You say
Yeah.
that, but let's assume it's a motion to suppress in a criminal matter.
With evidence,
Yeah.
I wouldn't want it, I wouldn't want it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
But the defendant's attorney says, no, I don't want to come to court. But we do it by Zoom and my client's okay with it.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
mean.
care what the DA says, because
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as you're not sort of putting one party at an unfair disadvantage, which I don't think you would be under those facts. So yeah, if the defendant, it's really the defendant's interest that I think should drive it because they're the ones who have the constitutional rights, the due process rights. I think as long as you're not putting one party at a real, an unfair disadvantage, I don't think there's any reason not to do it.
Well, give me, what example would there be with a defendant's attorney putting his client in an undue, well, how would that ever happen? Like, give me a scenario.
Where the defendant would be
Yeah.
disadvantaged by
Yeah.
Zoom. I've had,
For that matter, a prosecutor.
if you had a witness who for whatever reason wasn't able to testify by Zoom, I think that's pretty rare in this day and age.
He can even show up. If that client
Yeah.
wants to show up, he could
Yeah,
show up.
no, I think that sort of hybrid is something that I've seen done where some folks are in court and some people are on Zoom. I think that's a good approach.
You're okay with that?
I am. I've seen it done.
Are they doing that in the district court now?
Hybrid motions?
Well,
Not a lot, but they're doing a lot.
I talked to one judge in the last 2 weeks. He goes, I'm done with COVID. Everyone's got to show up. Well,
I
I
think
told this judge what Dolly told me, and he changed his tone. But yeah, do they have the system now for half and half, the hybrid system, as you call it?
most of the courts I'm working in are doing both right now in some capacity. Particularly for sort of administrative hearings, pretrial hearings, compliance and election hearings. I think a lot of courts are going to stick with that, and I think they should. Because it's a 5-minute hearing, you drive for an hour, you sit there, you wait for your case, and I think if we can get away from that model, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm almost done here. And what about, put COVID aside, there's no COVID, unbelievable, we're all doing great. But, the attorney, I don't know who the attorney is, it's more, if being a criminal case, it's generally the defendant's attorney, because the DA's got all sorts of support staff. And he says, you know what? I got a little kid, 2, 3 years old. I don't want to have to drive to Middlesex Superior. I live in Jamaica Plains, Suffolk. I don't want to go. The motion. There's no COVID issue. Everyone, we're doing great. Are you going to let that person do it by Zoom?
I think if we can do it by Zoom, and again, it's not unfair to either party, then I'd try to accommodate that, and I think I would, yes.
And you agreed, we never did Zoom other than a year or 2 ago.
Correct.
So that, without even COVID, there's no COVID, you'd allow lawyers to appear by Zoom.
I think so, and I think
You
a
can
lot
say,
of,
I think so.
I'm sorry, that's a verbal tick, I suppose.
Yeah.
I would. And
And
I
just
believe
nice
that a
and
lot of
normal.
folks-
I have childcare issues.
Mhm.
My kid's home. I got to take care of her. And I don't have a problem. I'm a supporter of that too. You're okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. What about judge shopping? I've heard things about you that are awful. Yeah, I'm making this up. Making this up. I don't want to appear before you.
Mhm.
Everything I'm talking about legal. I'm not saying gonna lie to the court. But I file a motion, and I don't want to appear in front of you. Clearly, it's judge shopping. You're convinced of that. You favor that? You against it? What's your position on that?
I don't blame any attorney for judge shopping. I think as long as you do it within the rules of ethics, I think it's part of being a zealous advocate.
I agree with that too. We agree on a lot. He's good. Yeah, I don't have any questions. I think you're gonna do a good job.
Thank you, Counsel.
Yeah, you answered all my questions. You got a nice background. You've done a private sector with Connie and Basil. You've you did on your own in the private sector, I should say, also in the DA's office. Civil, I assume you don't have a lot of civil practice, but that's okay. The only thing I'll leave with this thought, I'm that one counselor here every week when we got people like you, assistant DAs. I can even tell you your answer if you want. My feeling's always been, once a prosecutor, always a prosecutor. So just keep that in the back of your mind, because a lot of people think the way I do, whether we're crazy or whatever. That's it. You have my vote next week.
Thank you, Counselor
Okay,
Riley. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you for all the time that you afforded me. I think it was about 4 hours. I feel like the reason that I meet with everyone is that I want to know the whole person. That's who I'm voting for, not just on this paper. So I appreciate that. I'm going to ask you questions that I ask everyone traditionally. I want to know your journey and how you got here. Okay, so you applied to the JNC. First time, you hit it out of the park. You got an appointment. So for people to know, I like to let people know because they don't know the process. There are 21 lawyers that are appointed by each governor, and they have an awesome responsibility. People think that we do. We don't. Councils only can vote yes or no. We don't know who applied. That's it. But these 21 attorneys are chosen to decide who they're going to interview for a judge or clerk magistrate, and ultimately who are they going to recommend to the governor. So I've been here 21 years, and this is the first time that we had a JNC that has never, ever in this administration had 21 lawyers there. That's egregious to me. And I'm not saying it to you, but I want the public to know because we haven't had public like this before. And so I want people to know. The average person has no way of knowing that. Now that offends me because there could be 6, 8, 10 people that are present and they all vote. Never saw the nominee, they never talked to them, they never interviewed them. And that to me is give a lifetime position to someone is wrong. So I just want to throw that out. Having said that, how many of these lawyers were present at your hearing?
So it was during COVID, so most of the folks were on a screen. There was one member of the JNC, not a commissioner, but one member of the JNC.
JNC, just JNC, those 21 people.
There was one commissioner present, and then on the screen, I would estimate maybe 10 or 11 attorneys, roughly.
You proved my point. And years ago, when I first started, I don't know people on the JNC, and I shouldn't. We should be, we should do our own job. But I found out that the JNC chair sat down the 21 lawyers and said, if you don't attend the hearing, you don't vote on the nominee. That's justice. That's just for justice sake. So I just want people to know that those days are gone. So first of all, a lot of the questions I would have asked you have been asked, and as the facilitator, I asked last. But I'm just going to go through just, chronologically how you have come here. So you got your law degree in 2015. I mean, 2005. I'm sorry, 2005.
Correct.
Okay, so you were a law. Let me see. Where did you go? So you started out before you got your law degree with Attorney Connie, correct?
My first job out of law school after becoming a lawyer was a law clerk with the Juvenile Court.
Law clerk.
Yeah.
Okay. So so then you stayed with him after you got your law degree, and
Counselor, I'm sorry, I think-
you worked in a lot of things in a variety of matters. and you had your own caseload of private and court-appointed clients. Okay, so why did you leave? Only 2 years?
Which position specifically?
For the managing attorney for Attorney Carney.
So I worked with Attorney Carney for a total of 4 years. There were 2 law firms because the firm dissolved, but I worked with him for a total of 4 years.
Well, it's saying here that before you got your law degree to 2014 and then to 2016. This is what your resume says. So anyway, from there, that went on to 2016. That was 2014, 2016. So then it goes on 2016 to 2018, sole practitioner.
That's correct, yes.
Another 2 years. Okay, so why did you leave that position?
Why did I leave Attorney Carney's office or the?
I don't know if you want to, okay.
I'll explain both.
Why did you leave Attorney Carney's office after 2 years? I mean, he is, noted
Yeah.
around Massachusetts. Why would you decide? to leave?
Respectfully, and I don't know if there's a mistake in my application, I worked for him for 4 years. Of that, I'm certain. It was from
Okay,
2012 to
all I'm
2016.
saying is, it says managing attorney, J.W. Carney Jr. Associates, January 1, 2014.
Madam, look,
August
two above
31,
that, two above it, two above it.
2016.
He was 4 years.
Okay, all right. So, okay, that's a different one. Okay. I got a different one that says something different. Okay, so this one is, okay. So, let me see, sole practitioner, 2016 to, so that was like, I don't know, 2 years and, yeah, 2 years. Okay, so then you went to Attorney Carney. Okay, I got it. And that was 2012 to 2016. On this one, it didn't, it's different, but that's okay.
It might be a formatting issue.
That's okay. It doesn't matter. I'm seeing it here on this sheet. That's why I was confused. All right, now I get it. Okay, so, all right, so you worked in the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office, September 2006 to October 2012. So, that was your 6 years right there.
Yes, that was my first term.
Okay. And so, you were in the Juvenile Court Department, September 2005 to August. That's like 11 months.
It's almost exactly a calendar year. I think it's September 1st to August 31st.
Okay. All right. So, the thing is that, with all your experience, I think it's great. And we do go back to age and experience and life experience. So, putting all that, but you have done a lot in your young age. You have done a lot, because I've seen a lot of resumes in 21 years. I mean, we just had someone 30, 32, 33 years, couldn't even count 1,750, bench trials and so on. But anyway, what I was going to say is that, I was just concerned about you moving on every 2 years average, and then the 6 years was the most. Okay, so, but your cases impress me, that you have had some serious cases. I prefer criminal cases. I really I don't want to see someone sitting there with just civil and no criminal. My own opinion, you can learn civil on the bench, and you had some. But criminal is something, I have this theory that if you were an attorney and you never had a criminal case, you would be timid when you had to make a decision on that person before you that has had some criminal cases. So I do want to talk about, first of all, I want to find out philosophy. A few years ago, we voted on the marijuana issue. How did you vote on that? Yes or no?
I can say I've supported legalized marijuana for most of my adult life. So I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure I would have voted to legalize it.
So do you don't feel that that's a gateway to higher drugs, other drugs?
I suppose it can be, and it may well be in some instances, but I think the harm of criminalizing it and arresting people for it, I think probably outweighs any health risks.
Yeah, well, I have 2 friends, and they both lost sons. One was an only child. And they started out marijuana, and they died overdose on heroin. So I only know my personal experience in those mothers. Okay, so would you ever shut off a recorder when you're a judge?
No, I think a judge's official business should be public record.
It's actually, it's illegal to do that, isn't it? Really?
I think there might be trial court rules
Yeah.
to that effect.
How do you feel about ICE? Do you support that agency?
I mean, I think we have to have some immigration enforcement in this country. So I don't support abolishing federal immigration authorities. I was not a fan, candidly, of when they were arresting people on the front steps of courthouses. I think that's a
But
terrible
you're
practice.
From the sheriff's department, do you support that?
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
I said they're abolishing that from the sheriff's department. Do you agree with that?
I didn't know that was
Yeah,
happening.
that's something that just coming up recently. Yeah, you know, drugs have been with us. We certainly haven't won the war on drugs long before you came along, and it's getting worse. My concern in Massachusetts is we don't have enough drug treatment centers. I mean, long-term. Okay, we only get about 3. And so I know my friends' sons, if they had a long-term placement, they'd probably be alive today. But it's only short-term, and there's only a few of them, only one for women. So what I'm asking you is, if you could work with judges to see if you can lobby these legislators. I think it's only about 1.5% of their budget goes to judiciary. And, you know, they can pass all the laws about drug addiction and drugs, but if you don't have some place to send these people, these aren't hardened criminals. And I'm not an expert, but I heard the first time you take heroin, you're addicted. So, you know, I hope that you know, will remember that and do that. I was going to ask questions that other people asked, but I want to give you the opportunity to talk about some of your cases, okay? And the shaken baby really concerns me. And from my experience in seeing it through the years, and I had a friend, and her neighbor, who was a friend, took care of her 18-month-old little girl. And we know that that person did kill that baby, but we don't have a camera, we don't have anything. That is the hardest, in my opinion, she went free. That to me is the hardest thing to prove. And you have, I saw that in your case. Tell us about that one that you had.
Sure. I was co-counsel for a gentleman who was charged with shaking baby, and the victim was his son who died. He was, I believe, 6 months old at the time. I've prosecuted shaken baby cases. I think, you know, there are certainly people who shake babies and cause injuries. This particular individual, though, always swore, you know, as sincerely as anyone can, that he was innocent. I believed him to be innocent. I still do. But it's the type of case that if you look at sort of at first glance, I think a lot of people probably would have convicted him just on sort of the circumstances of him being alone with the baby and there being no obvious reason. But me and my co-counsel, we dug a lot deeper, and I'm really proud of what we did. And we actually looked into the family history, specifically the mother's family history. And we found that there was actually a history in her family of not just babies, I think some children and even an adult, sort of dying suddenly under unusual situations involving brain bleeds, which is consistent with what we see with shaken baby cases. And in fact, we found it was either a news clipping or an obituary from Sri Lanka, where the mother's family was from years ago, maybe the 60s or 70s, where a baby had died under the same circumstances. And we did genetic testing of the mother, and it showed that basically that in her family, there was a higher likelihood of what are called connective tissue disorders. And in fact, we presented our findings to the state's medical expert, not our expert, their expert. And he actually, when he reviewed the information that we'd found, he changed the finding from homicide to unknown or undecided. But he changed his finding from homicide.
But it is very, I mean, it is very hard to determine, you know, but long before you know, probably were in high school, there was an EPIN case. And a lot of people were accusing the mother and father of it and, you know, all of this, but it was an 18-year-old girl. from England. And she was taking care of this little boy. I forget now how old he was. He probably was maybe, he wasn't 2, I don't think. So anyway, she would go, I read that case, I saw it on TV, Court TV. I really, really looked at that case. And they said that she would go into Boston and go to all the theaters, and she'd come home at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I know as a mother, you can't get up at 6, 7, or be able to really take care of that child. And so, anyway, I know the other side of the story, what really happened. And I knew the police officer, he was a friend of ours from Newton, and he got the call. She called and she said, the baby was, this is the babysitter, that wasn't responsive. And so he came to the door and she said, he was crying and he wouldn't stop. And so then I was going to give him a bath and I threw him down and he hit his head on the bathtub. And she was saying all this stuff, but there was no record of it, And he thought it was just, a normal call, and, he wasn't prepared for all of that. So she got off and she went back to England and everything. And I always thought, that's what they try to blame the parents. It was a terrible thing. And I just wonder, is there any way, medically, I don't think they can. I mean, you could do that to an adult in the brain, and that's what happens, But no, so they didn't find any guilt in that case, did they?
In the Epen case?
No,
My-
yours.
Oh, in my case, no, in fact, the prosecution dropped the charges
Yeah.
after the medical examiner changed his finding.
And I don't know, in your experience, God forbid, I don't hope there's not that many, shaken baby cases, but it always seems that they're never found guilty.
I wouldn't say never. I can think of some where people have been convicted.
I should say never, there might be, I don't know everyone, but the ones that I have followed, there hasn't been. What was the other one? The John Ho.
Mhm.
You remember that one?
I do.
Okay. God bless you. I don't know how you get involved in child abuse and go home at night. It's just, to me, the most horrific thing. I don't think there's a sentence that serves these people. I really. So tell us about that. I know, but tell.
Sure. That was a case I prosecuted when I was a member of the child abuse unit in Middlesex. So it would have been around 2011, 2012. He was charged with sexual offenses against his niece. And she was an exceptional young woman. She was in high school at the time that we were preparing for trial. Just a really great kid, honestly, just a really wonderful kid. Even now, I've never for a second doubted her credibility or anything like that.
It was over a period of years.
It was for many years, many acts. It was really horrific stuff. We went to trial once and it was a hung jury. We retried the case and he was convicted. At some point, I don't remember if it was the day he was convicted or the day he was sentenced. The young woman made some comments which were exculpatory to some degree. By exculpatory, I mean favorable to the defendant, which I disclosed those, of course, to the defense, which you have to do as a prosecutor. And there ended up being a motion for a new trial, which sort of uncovered other evidence that would have been potentially helpful to the defendant. And his conviction was actually vacated, and which means wiped out. And rather than try the case a third time, she decided, understandably, that she couldn't testify a third time. She'd already been through 2 trials. Very difficult. I mean, I candidly, I did the right thing. Obviously, you have to turn over exculpatory evidence. But I felt, of course, bad for her that the conviction didn't ultimately stand, I suppose.
Well, I mean, it's very hard for a child to testify like that under those circumstances. No, in fact, I can remember that daycare center in Medford, and what do I know? But I felt the mother was innocent, and the sister was innocent. But that Tukey, I really believed he was guilty. Now, majority of people said he wasn't, and that he was just a scapegoat. But You know, God works in mysterious ways. My late husband was a firefighter, and one of the firefighters came to me and he said, Marilyn, they're thinking of letting Tukey go, vote no. And the way it works is for people to know, if the governor voted yes, then it would come to the council, but to release him. But if she voted no, it was swift. If she voted no, it would come to us. So I know that they would release him because it was public opinion and there's something that happened in California and they felt that he was a scapegoat. So anyway, this firefighter, good friend, and he said to me, Marilyn, my 3-year-old daughter was going to that daycare and she started crying. She didn't want to go. She was, really upset. And she would come home with someone else's panties. Panties were inside out. There was blood in her panties. So they went to the doctor. She went to the hospital, and the doctor said that she was abused, and he also used some kind of an instrument into her. Now, what happened was, the end of that story was that the lieutenant governor said no. So he served 2 more years. He was out. But there's people in Massachusetts that still feel he's not guilty. But when I looked in his eyes, he was crying, my friend, was crying. And I got to tell you what these people do, and I'm preaching to the choir, when they abuse a child. That girl is in her 30s, beautiful, beautiful girl. And she has never had a lasting relationship. She's been engaged twice because of what happened to her. Because they think because they're a child. No, that's something that they, back here, they never forget. So have you had a lot of child abuse cases? You had one with 2 girls.
I did, yep. So I have had a lot of child abuse cases. I prosecuted child abuse cases when I
Now,
was,
were there 2 sisters? What was it?
nope, just 2 friends of the defendant's daughters, and they would go to the house for sleepovers, and he would take advantage of the children.
So tell us how that how that resolved.
He was convicted. We went to trial. Both girls testified. They were both probably about 9, 10, maybe 11 years old at the time of the trial. So, obviously a lot of preparation goes into putting a child that young on the witness stand.
Did you have them come right into court?
They have to, yeah.
So do you tell him he might be there?
I did. And in fact, I think I told you that story when we had breakfast. One of the girls had to come into court for a pretrial hearing, what's called a motion in limine. And I told her as we were walking towards the courthouse, just so you know, he's going to be in there. And she just sort of broke down. And we gave her a little pep talk, including her mom, who was amazing. And then she went into the courtroom, was very proud, chest out, was very, I don't know, she really had a lot of courage, really inspiring. And she ended up testifying at the trial. And he was convicted of, I think, of everything. He was
What was
many counts.
What case, when you look back, it was the most disappointing to you that back here that you
Yeah.
feel like justice wasn't served? Could you tell us that?
I had a client, this might seem unusual because the charges were ultimately dismissed, but I had I think I said a child. I had a client who was charged with very serious sex offenses. He was 17 years old. He was a high school student who went to camp in Western Mass, and there were horrific acts of hazing, but which some co-defendants undoubtedly committed. But the evidence against my client was really weak. I mean, really weak. And I was always baffled that they even charged him. And but they arrested him. They arrested him on the Friday before Labor Day weekend. He was driven from Somerville to Great Barrington. He ended up spending like 6 days in jail and was finally released on bail. And this young man, who again, I really, it's not just that I think he was innocent. The evidence to me was not such that he should have even been charged. And he just had his life derailed for like 2 years. Senior year of high school, he had to do from home. He actually ended up going to college, but it was really 2, 3, maybe 4 years before he could really get his life back on track. And he was 17 at the time, but that was an adult at the time. So if you Google his name, these horrific allegations come up. And it always bothered me because I think it was really unfair to him. I don't think it was appropriate. And I don't know, I think it just shows sort of how difficult it can be just to be charged with a crime. Obviously, to be convicted is more serious, but even to be charged with a crime.
People out there that'll believe you're guilty.
Right, and for the rest of his life, when someone Googles his name, that's something he's going to have to contend with. So that always bothered me.
Tell me about specialty courts. You've been involved.
Yeah, I support specialty courts. I've had some involvement in them. I think they're good. Drug courts are great. We have a mental health session in the Cambridge District Court, which is fantastic. They have a court. It's a session for homeless individuals. They call it community court. I think the more that we can tailor probation to the specific needs of people and sort of get them resources, particularly with the homeless court. They used to run it out of a church in Harvard Square, which is fantastic because I talked about this earlier. The court's in Medford. So if you're a homeless person in Harvard Square or Central Square, getting out to Medford is not easy.
No.
But getting to Harvard Square, or now they do it in East Cambridge, it's a lot easier.
Right.
I'm a big fan of bringing those resources to where people are.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I was concerned about, are they really effective? And I've seen the drug court, and like I said, I've had 2 close friends who lost their sons to drugs, and I wanted to see what it was all about. I'll tell you, I'm very impressed. And I went to the graduation of the people who have gone through the drug program, and they were all ages. And I'll tell you, I was sitting in the back, and tears came to my eyes. I mean, to hear their testimony, someone 30 years had been on drugs or alcohol, another was alcohol, and they couldn't say enough about the program. They hugged the judge. It was really inspiring. So I think it is important. And I don't know if they didn't have it, how would the court be able to have the time to really devote to that, which is the biggest problem that the society is seeing,
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I think that human connection between the court and the defendants, where the defendants feel like people are rooting for them, I think that's really, really important.
Right. So, okay, so you have said in your J&C questionnaire that you want to open it up more. You want to expand it. Tell me, what would you like to do? What are your plans?
I mean, I'd like to be involved in any of them. I think the ones that are sort of coming out now that are relatively new, I think Veterans Court is a really good thing because we have so many young veterans who've come back with problems and they need help. I think that's
Right.
great.
So you want an expansion?
I would expand that. I know in Springfield, they have an early adult specialty court for, I think, 18 to 22 or 23. I think that's a great idea. So I'm very open to expanding specialty courts.
Well, a lot of people don't know, but the Governor's Council oversees veterans, and I've been here 21 years. And God bless the veterans agents, the local, they're doing a wonderful job. And only one in probably 20 years ago, and it didn't apply to this person. But so they are very effective. Our local agents, if people don't know it, the veterans. So so now, what do you in your involvement in the court that you're going to? What change would you like to see?
More specialty courts, I think, is a good thing. I think
Is there something in the court that you see that you'd like to improve?
specific to the Boston Municipal Court. No, I think it's a very busy court. I think they do a great job. They have some specialty courts there. I think in general, a big sort of point of emphasis for me, which I don't know if it answers your question, I hope it does. I like to see attorneys being civil to each other. I think having decorum and professionalism is really important. I'm not saying that's a particular problem in the BMC. I just think in general, I think the best attorneys are collegial attorneys.
So think about your most difficult case, and what was the most rewarding outcome?
Probably the case I talked about, the 2 girls at the sleepover, because he really preyed on those women, girls, excuse me.
Now,
And
what's the punishment that you get?
I'll tell you exactly, he got 10 to 12 years in prison.
Wow.
And for that offense, I think it's a mandatory minimum of 10 years.
Yeah. Well, I want to tell you, I got a very nice call from Representative Jay Livingston yesterday.
Appreciate that.
And you were at the district attorney's office together?
We were colleagues many years ago, yes.
Yeah, and he said a lot of good things about you. And I also want to put in the record that I received a letter from retired Judge Honorable Michelle
Michelle.
B. Hogan. Okay. And she said she was unable to come. And she said she had the honor of sitting in Cambridge District Court for over 22 years. She retired 2020. Okay. She observed many attorneys who practiced before me, experienced, and those new to the profession. During those years, I had the opportunity to compare and to contrast their skills, both moral and legal. Sam practiced before me often, first practicing in Cambridge in 2008. I don't intend to rehash his resume because it speaks for itself. In it, you will note his varied experience. He has worked in private practice, in juvenile, superior, and district courts. He wasn't given those opportunities, but earned them. I presided over many trials with Sam where he displayed a keen understanding of the rules, law, and procedure and humankind. He held the position of supervisor over many of Middlesex County's assistant district attorneys. Attorney Zagadjori, did I pronounce it right?
I say Zaganiori, but we're right there. That's great.
Is never shy about expressing his thoughts, but always respectful while doing so. He has the ability to laugh at himself. He is clearly sympathetic to the plight of others as reflected in his sentencing recommendations. He is a keen advocate who clearly states his position to opposing counsel and is very much respected by them. He resolves many cases short of trial, not because it was efficient, but the right thing to do. He fought hard, but always with heart. Sam is common sense and is well-grounded. He served in supervisory positions as he progressed. I worked with Sam during a trial advocacy training program for ADAs. Sam developed and oversaw the entire program himself. He is a creative, independent thinker and teacher. Attorney Zaganori is highly motivated, oftentimes working after hours to ensure matters were properly handled and was very well prepared. Attorney Sam Zaganori is very well qualified to serve as a judge. He practiced equal justice for all on a daily basis. He will be an excellent asset to the bench. Kindly, Honorable Michelle B. Hogan, retired. Very nice letter. And I do want to just say, you know, talking about your parents and grandparents, I can identify with that. My father never got more of an education till the day he died, 12 years old, and that was in Italy. They didn't send him to school, send him to work. That was the sign of the times, you know? So I know what they went through, and I'm sure that Albanians went through the same discrimination coming to this country. But you know what? They are, and my parents were the most patriotic. That's the thing. So, I'm going to adjourn now, excuse me, and I'm going to be very pleased to put your name in nomination next week, and we will vote. So I adjourn. I thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, Counselor. Thank you very much.
You know.